There is a moment every great champion eventually reaches, a moment that has nothing to do with grand slams, ranking points, or prize money. It is the moment when the world stops seeing you as an athlete and starts seeing you as a story. Not just any story. The kind of story that makes producers salivate, that fills airtime, that turns a human being into content. Serena Williams reached that moment decades ago. She survived it. But the question that is quietly shaking the tennis world right now is whether the next generation has to go through the same fire, or whether the women who walked through it first can do something about it. Because something is happening in this sport that people are only now beginning to say out loud. And if you care about tennis, about what it is becoming and who gets to shape that future, then you need to sit with this one all the way through. Let us start with what is not in dispute. Alexandra Eala is the real deal. Not promising. Not one to watch in a few years. Right now, today, at 20 years old, she is one of the most compelling figures professional tennis has produced in a very long time. She is ranked inside the top 30 in the world, with her results at Indian Wells expected to push her even higher ahead of the Miami Open. She has beaten Iga Swiatek, the former world number 1. She has beaten Madison Keys. She knocked out Jasmine Paolini in Dubai. And at the 2026 BNP Paribas Open in Indian Wells, she opened her debut appearance of that tournament with a battling 3-set win over Diana Yastremska before booking her place in the round of 16, when 4th seed Coco Gauff retired with an injury with the score reading 6-2, 2-0 in Eala's favor. That 4th round result made her the first Filipino player in history to reach that stage at Indian Wells. Let that sink in. The first in the entire history of the tournament. And she got there while carrying the weight of an entire nation on her shoulders in a way that very few athletes anywhere in the world currently understand. After beating Yastremska in that midnight match under the California desert sky, surrounded by Filipino fans who had stayed up past midnight in the cold just to watch her play, Eala told reporters that for them to make the effort to stay up late and stay in the cold and cheer her on really added to the feelings and the emotions. That sentence alone tells you everything about what she represents to people. More than 10 million Filipinos live outside the Philippines. Around 1.7 million of them are in California alone. When Eala plays in Indian Wells, she is not just playing a tennis match. She is playing for all of them. The BNP Paribas Open Tournament understood immediately what was happening. Tournament executive Philippe Dor said it plainly. They love every minute of it. They benefit from it. They promote it. The tournament's most watched YouTube video of the entire year, by a massive margin, was a day-in-the-life feature on Eala, racking up 94,000 views. When Indian Wells announced its class of 2026, 9 women representing the tournament, it included 7 top 10 players, 1 well-known American, and Eala. At the time, she was ranked 31st in the world. They included her anyway, because they understood something that has taken the broader media landscape a little longer to fully appreciate. This young woman is a phenomenon, not just a player. Former British number 1 Greg Rosetsky watched Eala at Indian Wells and offered this assessment. A good lefty who moves exceptionally well, competes incredibly well, with firepower that is gradually building as she grows into her body. And for all the pressure and expectation on her shoulders, she is finding a way to push through. Rosetsky called her the real deal and predicted she will reach the top 10. That is the conversation Eala deserves to be having. Her game, her mind, her future. But the tennis world is also having a different conversation. One about how young women of color who rise to this level of global attention get treated by the institutions that are supposed to celebrate them, and what happens when those institutions fall short. To understand why that conversation has urgency right now, you have to understand what Serena Williams lived through. Not in the abstract, historical sense. You have to actually sit with what it meant. Serena turned professional in 1995 at 14 years old. She came from Compton, California. She and Venus learned to play on public courts with their father, on surfaces that bore no resemblance to the manicured hard courts she would later dominate. When they arrived on the professional tour, they were unlike anything the sport had ever seen in terms of power, athleticism, and sheer presence. They were also black women in a sport that had been overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly European, and overwhelmingly built around a very specific idea of what a tennis player was supposed to look like. The sports media had no real framework for them. And rather than build one rooted in respect and analysis, too much of it defaulted to something far uglier. Coverage of Serena's early career repeatedly focused not on her serve, which would become one of the most feared weapons in the history of the game, but on her appearance, her body, her style. Comments that had no business being directed at any athlete, let alone a teenage girl, appeared in newspapers and broadcast segments with disturbing regularity. Male players who displayed similar passion or frustration were described as competitive. When Serena did the same, the words used were different, and the implications behind them were different. In 2001, something happened at Indian Wells, the very same tournament where Eala is now making history, that Serena Williams would later describe as traumatizing. During a semifinal match, Venus withdrew with a knee injury before playing Serena. The crowd, apparently convinced that the withdrawal had been orchestrated for tactical advantage, turned hostile. When Serena walked out to play the final, she and her father were subjected to racist abuse from the stands. The Williams family endured the match and left. And then they stayed away from Indian Wells for 14 years. 14 years. Let that be the measure of what that day cost them. Most media coverage of the incident treated it as a singular, unfortunate happening rather than examining what it revealed about the culture of the sport and the specific hostility that two young black women had been navigating from the moment they arrived. The pattern continued for years. When Serena wore a catsuit at the 2002 U.S. Open, coverage that should have focused on her performance spent significant energy debating whether her outfit was appropriate. In 2018, she wore a different style of catsuit at the French Open, one designed specifically to help with blood circulation after complications from childbirth, and the French Tennis Federation banned the garment outright. That same year, at the U.S. Open final, she argued with an umpire over calls she believed were inconsistent with how male players were treated in similar situations. She was hit with a game penalty at a critical moment in a Grand Slam final. The debate that followed was fierce, and many serious observers believed she was right. The point is not to relitigate any single incident. The point is that across a career spanning nearly 3 decades, Serena Williams built her extraordinary legacy, 23 Grand Slam singles titles for Olympic gold medals, and a ranking at the very top of the sport for a combined 319 weeks, while simultaneously fighting a battle that none of her male peers and few of her female peers were ever required to fight. A battle against a media culture that seemed perpetually more interested in who she was than in what she could do. Now look at what is happening to Eala. She is 20 years old. She plays with a left-handed game that expert after expert has described as technically brilliant, tactically sophisticated, and mentally ferocious. Before Indian Wells, she had already claimed a win over world number 7 Jasmine Paolini at the Dubai Tennis Championships, adding to previous victories over Madison Keys, Iga Swiatek, and Clara Tauson in 2025. And after her loss to Linda Noskova at Indian Wells, a defeat she handled with the kind of composed honesty that most athletes twice her age struggle to find, she stood at the microphone and said something that has been repeated across the tennis world ever since. She said she knows that she belongs here, that she leaves with happiness, that the initial feelings after the match were a tough pill to swallow, but that reaching the 4th round of Indian Wells in her debut is something she is really proud of. That is not the language of someone who stumbled into the top 30 by accident. That is not a 20-year-old overwhelmed by the moment. That is someone who understands exactly where she is going and has made peace with what the journey will require. After the defeat to Noskova, Eala admitted that she never quite felt comfortable, saying she was unable to find her groove and that nothing clicked in the match. She handled it cleanly, without excuses, with the intellectual honesty of someone who has already developed the emotional infrastructure to process defeat and move forward. She pointed out that their previous meeting was as 13-year-olds in a junior tournament, and that she would be a fool to base her preparation on a match played at that age. That is not just composure. That is wisdom. But the journey Eala is now on includes something she did not sign up for when she decided she wanted to be a professional tennis player. It includes an enormous global media apparatus that is hungry for her story, fascinated by the cultural phenomenon around her, and that does not always handle that fascination responsibly. The questions being asked of Eala at 20 are not only about her serve percentage or her tactical adjustments. They're questions about what she means, what she represents, what it is like to carry the hopes of a diaspora. Questions that sound like celebration, but can quietly become something else, intrusive, destabilizing, dehumanizing, if handled without care. Venus Williams, who alongside her sister defined what it meant to be a young woman of color navigating the professional tennis circuit, was asked before Eala's U.S. Open debut in 2025 whether she had any advice for the rising Filipino star. Venus, drawing from more than 25 years of experience in this sport, offered this: just enjoy yourself. When you are having fun, things are easy. When you are not, it is not as much fun. You have to put the fun first. Simple on the surface, profound underneath it. What Venus was really saying, earned through decades of experience in exactly this environment, is that the only sustainable way to operate at the highest level when the entire world is watching is to protect your joy. To not let the external machinery of attention, expectation, commentary, and scrutiny eat the thing that made you want to play in the first place. Eala went out and won her first Grand Slam match. Beat Clara Tauson at the U.S. Open in 3 sets. That is not a coincidence. That is what it looks like when the wisdom of one generation lands cleanly with the next. One factor worth noting is that Indian Wells is widely regarded as having one of the slowest surfaces on the professional tour, and Eala has tended to produce her best results on faster or medium-pace courts like Miami, Dubai, and Guadalajara. The Noskova defeat, brutal on the scoreboard at 6-2, 6-0, tells a more nuanced story in that context. Eala made only 57% of her first serves in that match and won just 36% of those points, a first serve percentage that will need to improve significantly if she is to go deeper at tournaments in the future. These are the honest technical takeaways from her Indian Wells campaign. They belong in the conversation alongside everything else. It is also worth noting that Eala is now 0 for 11 against Czech opponents on the WTA Tour, a pattern she will be looking to address. But here is the larger picture. With her ranking points from Miami last year set to expire under the WTA's rolling 52-week system, Eala heads into the Miami Open needing to defend 390 points, the most at any tournament on her calendar this season. Anything less than a semifinal appearance will see a significant drop in her ranking. That is the immediate competitive reality. And yet the broader conversation around Eala, the one happening in boardrooms and broadcast studios and social media threads stretching from Manila to California to London, is not really about ranking points at all. It is about whether the machinery of the sport, the media, the institutions, the cultural apparatus that determines how a player is presented to the world, has evolved enough to meet a player like Eala at the level she deserves. The broader question that Eala's rise forces the tennis world to ask is one that makes powerful institutions uncomfortable. When a young woman of color from a country that has never had this kind of visibility in professional tennis becomes one of the sport's biggest draws, when she is out pulling men's top 10 players in practice crowd attendance, when tournament executives describe her arrival as a phenomenon they are actively promoting, who is responsible for making sure that the machinery of attention around her handles her with integrity? Historically, the answer has been nobody in particular. The sports media environment has tended to operate on the assumption that athletes, especially young women of color, are fair game for whatever direction a conversation takes. Serena Williams did not accept that culture. She pushed back on it, loudly and consistently, for nearly 3 decades. She paid a price for that pushback in how she was portrayed, how she was penalized, and how much additional energy she had to spend managing the narrative around herself rather than simply playing tennis. But she also changed things. Players today, including Eala, compete in an environment that is at least partially better because of what Serena refused to accept. Serena herself reflected in late 2025 that the discourse around Black women in tennis has shifted considerably since her playing days. That young Black women athletes no longer face the same volume and severity of derogatory commentary she received as a matter of course. Not satisfaction, but genuine happiness that some of the worst of it has become genuinely unacceptable rather than simply controversial. But Eala's situation raises the question of whether that progress extends fully to young women of color from outside the traditional tennis markets. The Philippines is not a country with a long WTA history. The Filipino diaspora community that follows Eala around the globe is not a demographic that sports media has historically known how to cover with sophistication. When journalist TJ Manitok described the Philippines being hungry for the next Manny Pacquiao, when he spoke about life stopping in the entire country when Pacquiao fought, he was describing a cultural intensity that Western sports institutions are still learning to handle responsibly. That intensity, that devotion, that scale of national investment in a single athlete deserves to be covered with the same depth and care that any other cultural phenomenon receives. What makes this conversation most important is that Eala herself has already started to shape it. She is not passive in how she occupies the space. When she won the match against Goff at Indian Wells on International Women's Day, in circumstances that ended with Goff retiring due to a left arm injury, Eala used her post-match moment to acknowledge her mother, Riza, watching from the stands. She said she wanted to thank her for being the amazing woman that she is and for helping her become the woman that she is. And then she extended that to all mothers. Her mother blew kisses from the stands. That is not a scripted PR moment. That is a 20-year-old who understands exactly what her platform is for and is using it deliberately. She is choosing what her story is about,